And welcome back to Bracket Breakdown. Keanu Barton with Pete Gillen, and we got a duo of insiders with us, John Rothstein and Gary Parrish. And fellas, I know you guys have a ton of questions, so I decided to bring in somebody that might have some answers. Time now to welcome in the chair of the Selection Committee, Bubba Cunningham, and Keith Gill, the vice chair of the Selection Committee, and he will now chair the committee for the 2026 tournament. I want to welcome you both, but Keith, I want to start off with what was maybe the most challenging decision that the committee faced just during this process?
Yeah, you know, I think we faced a lot of them in terms of, you know, we're trying to bracket with several conferences that have multiple teams within that bracket. Obviously, when it comes down to the end, you're thinking about those last 4 or 5 teams getting into the tournament. Those are gut-wrenching votes. They're really challenging. And so I think those two things stick out to me as kind of what was really difficult about this year's process.
Bubba, as you know, I know all of the things you are allowed to do and not to do once North Carolina is brought up in the room. But there's a whole world of people watching right now who isn't as familiar with the rules and regulations of the Selection Committee. So in the spirit of transparency, can you walk us through what happens when North Carolina comes up?
Sure, very easily, because what happens is they ask me to leave the room. So any athletic director or conference commissioner, when any of the schools come up that they're, you know, as a conference commissioner, any of the schools in the league, or me as the athletic director, any discussion about North Carolina, I had to leave the room. And then obviously Keith can answer any question you have about what that discussion may have been and how a decision was made, but I was not a part of any of it.
Keith, let me turn it to you then. You are in the room for the North Carolina conversations. Obviously, there's a lot of conversations happening throughout the country right now about whether the Tar Heels should have actually been in this field. If you were trying to make the case in favor of North Carolina, how would you make it to us?
Yeah, you know, the committee spent a lot of time talking about North Carolina, and so when you're getting down to the end, you know, there's pros and cons on every team sheet that you look at, and certainly when you're looking at those quad one record, that's something we really kind of looked at quite a bit. But when you think about their strength of record, when you think about their WOB, when you think about their net, it shows that they had success against the remainder of that schedule. And they are also 8-0 in quad 2. And so those kind of things, when you take them all together, 9-12 overall in both quads, 8-0 in quad 2, strong strength of record, strong WOB, solid net. At the end of the day, the committee thought they should be the last team into the field.
Hey, Bubba, I'm just curious about this Mountain West related question. 2 teams from this league were vying for one of the final spots in the field, San Diego State and Boise State. The Broncos beat the Aztecs this week at the Mountain West Conference Tournament. Why was San Diego State the choice for Dayton and not Boise State?
Well, you know that San Diego State really had a great year as well. So did Boise. But San Diego State really had a couple of great wins early in the year in their non-conference schedule. And we felt like they scheduled themselves really pretty well. They didn't have quite as much success in the league this year. But particularly that win against Houston really buoyed their resume in the minds of the committee. So we think that they deserve to be in. And we're delighted that they are in. And we're delighted that the Mountain West has such great representation this year.
Yeah, I thought you guys did a great job. Congratulations. I have one question. Clemson and Louisville. All right. Louisville beat Clemson twice. They also had good wins against Indiana, West Virginia, okay, is there also, and Wake Forest, which were good teams, not NCAA tournament teams. How could you, and I thought you did a great job, but how come Clemson, I love Brad Brunell, great coach. I did one of their games on CBS Sports Network. But how could Louisville, was 27-7, lost in the finals of the ACC tournament, came in second in the ACC tournament ahead of Clemson in both areas. How can they be 5, Clemson, and a Louisville 7? That's my only question.
Yeah, we know we scrubbed all the teams up and down the best that we could, and we think that, you know, the big win that Clemson had over Duke being, you know, considered very much for the #1 overall seed, I mean, that was a very significant win for Clemson. And Clemson has had an outstanding year. And, again, we're scrubbing the teams, and in the committee's view, Clemson just came out on top, and largely because of that win.
But one more thing on Louisville. You've got it set up where Auburn is the #1 overall seed, and Louisville will be playing in Lexington with Auburn, and there's a scenario where those two teams could meet in the round of 32, about an hour, 10 hour and 15 minutes away from Louisville's campus. That's among the first things I notice when I look at that part of the bracket. Is that something that's noticed in the room? And if so, how much was that type of thing discussed?
Yeah, we did notice that, and we spent a lot of time thinking about it. Typically, our brackets are designed mostly geographically, but this year with 14 teams in from the SEC, we had to make some modifications in our bracketing. Now, what we really held to was keeping all of the teams on the same seed line, but that did require us to move a few teams geographically in a direction that we wouldn't have otherwise moved. And in this case, trying to keep just 4 teams in a particular region was what we ended up dealing with that particular portion of the bracket.
Keith, another question from me. You said on the selection show that had UAB won the American Athletic Conference tournament, that North Carolina would have been out of the bracket. Had we seen that happen, which team would have slid down then and been in Dayton with Xavier, Texas, and San Diego State?
Yeah, I think it would have been Utah State that would have slid down there. So on Saturday, the committee took its kind of last votes on Saturday night. So we voted in the last 4 teams into the field there, and then we took a vote with a contingency in the event, and that last team in the contingency was North Carolina. And if Memphis won, then we knew North Carolina would be in and they would slide into the field. And if UAB had won, then North Carolina would not have been in the field. And I believe that would have been Utah State would have been that team that would have been in Dayton.
Fellas, I got to ask you guys about history that we got to witness. 14 teams from the SEC. I just want to know, how difficult was it to seed these teams, just considering how difficult that might have been?
Well, it was a challenge, but boy, the SEC just had an outstanding year. You know, they won 88% of their non-conference games, had an outstanding year. And as we compared teams, it wasn't, thinking about how many teams from any particular league. It was, how does this team compare to the other teams under consideration? And over, a couple of day period of time, at the end of all the voting, there were 14 teams in, and all of them deserved to be in the field.
Interesting stuff right there, and plenty to look forward to. And fellas, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us. We know it's been a long few days, so make sure you guys enjoy a little bit of a breather. All right, fellas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And fellas, I told you guys you had some questions. I had some guys that might be able to answer a few of them. But Coach, any other reactions to what we've seen here in the bracket?
Well, I thought they did a great job, the committee. Once again, North Carolina now is at Virginia coaching, so maybe it's a Carolina bias, but they slid in. But they're a very good team for sure. I thought they did a great job. I feel bad for Boise State. Boise State, I thought, should have been in. As John said, they beat San Diego State in the tournament. But it's so hard. It's so close. I thought they did a great job overall.
It's a hard job, not only because you have to put together the bracket, but then you have to immediately go on television and answer a bunch of difficult questions that there aren't great answers for always. Because when this thing comes out, most people don't look at it and look at the good stuff. They focus on the bad. So let's focus on some good. Auburn as the #1 overall seed. I think that's right. And I had kept Auburn #1 in my top 25 and 1 daily rankings after losses. 1, 2, 3. They've lost 3 of the last 4. And the argument from my perspective was always, this is still the best body of work. This is still the team that would be the #1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament if it started today. For a couple of weeks now, fans have been pushing back on that. But it was nice to see the selection committee not get caught up in the last week or two and understand that if the goal here is to identify who had the best season, that is Auburn as of today.
I say this to Gary a lot, especially the last few days. You're a better man than I am, because I'm going to talk about the bad right now, and I'm going to talk about it emphatically. If the criteria for the NCAA tournament in terms of getting an at-large bid is to beat other NCAA tournament teams if you're on the bubble, how in the world could North Carolina get an at-large bid over Indiana and over West Virginia? Indiana, unlike North Carolina, has no quad 3 and 4 losses. Indiana went on the road to East Lansing and beat Michigan State, who's a 2 seed, and beat Purdue on its home floor, who is a 4 seed in this bracket. And Indiana did not get in the NCAA tournament. Then let's talk about West Virginia. West Virginia won a game at Allen Fieldhouse. West Virginia beat Gonzaga on a neutral court. It beat Arizona on a neutral court. It also beat Iowa State. and North Carolina is in over those two teams, I'm just waiting for somebody to say, we got some swamp water to sell you in Florida. That's how I feel right now. Now, with that said, I want to bring this in. North Carolina not deserving to be in has no bearing on how the Tar Heels could play in the bracket.
That's right.
Look at VCU in 2011.
I feel like a lot of people have a lot of questions about UNC, but when we come back on NCAA March Madness Bracket Breakdown, it's time to check in with our bracket expert, Jerry Palman, see how many teams he correctly predicted. Plus, Mackenzie Brooks is standing by to give us all the probability behind the bracket. Don't go anywhere.